Welcome to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. In each episode, we'll take the complex world of tax, all the jargon, acronyms, and stuff that make your eyes glaze over, and explain it in an impactful way to understand the complex and unknown areas. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Now, here's the host of Essential Tax Podcast, Mishkin Santa.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. On today's podcast, it's going to be a mini podcast. I want to talk about substantiation documentation when you convert a personal residence to a rental property. I can tell you that in my practice, it happens all the time. Someone comes to me and says, hey, I've been living in property X for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. And, I'm moving to country Y because we do a lot of cross-border people, individuals. And I'm converting it to rental property. What do I need to do? And I can tell you that a lot of times folks don't really talk about what substantiation you need to depreciate your rental property. I think people miss that a lot, which brings us to the Smith case, which I'll put a link in the show notes to the Smith case. But basically, in the Smith case, you have a rental property out in Los Angeles, California, that was a primary residence in its initial form. And some years later, it's converted to a rental property and it's being rented out. Now, this case is really interesting. It's a small opinion. It's a short opinion. The court goes out of its way to point out that this would probably have been a non-issue if the taxpayer had filed their tax return timely. I think it was a 2019 tax return that wasn't filed until 2024. But it was filed in 2024 after the IRS kind of audited the taxpayer and everything was kind of settled, except for whether or not the IRS is going to allow a depreciation deduction for the rental property. And basically, the court kind of zeroed in on Treasury Regulation 1.167G1, and I'll give you a citation for that in the show notes. And it talks about kind of what needs to be shown there. And basically, the court says, look, there's basically two things you have to look at to determine depreciation. The depreciation is going to end up being the lesser of one of the following things: the fair market value of the property on the date of change, or the adjusted basis of the property, right? The adjusted basis of the property should be pretty easy to determine. You take the basis and then you go through any capital improvements that were added on there. And that's I think a very straightforward one. But you've got to know the fair market value of the property on the date of change. How do you substantiate that? You get an appraisal. And so I'm now talking to all my CPA brethren out there. If a client walks in your door and says, hey, I'm converting my primary residence or my personal residence to a rental property, tell them that they need to go out and get appraisal for substantiation to satisfy Treasury Reg 1.167G1. Super, super important. The court did not allow the deduction because there was no appraisal that was done. There was no contemporaneous report. The taxpayer tried to use kind of a guesstimate, as the court quote unquote says in the transcript, which doesn't really work out in the end for the taxpayer. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb in your checklist moving forward, whether you're an individual taxpayer and you're considering converting your personal residence to a rental property, or you're a tax professional helping your client with the conversion. Just make sure that they go out and get that appraisal for the fair market value, and that they have, I'd also say, make sure they've got that original purchase and sale agreement and that they've well documented any capital improvements so that you can properly also determine the adjusted basis and figure out which is the lesser of the two values so that you satisfy the Treasury Reg. And with that, I wish you all a good day.